access it on a regular basis. So again, you can see differences between the well-terciles, 40% of the highest. Remember, we are a pro-poor sample, so when we say highest well-tercile, it's within the sample, so who are better off within the sample. Even there, you can see 40% vis-a-vis 21%. Urban more than rural, but again, it's also correlated with the educational level of the parents. You can see 33% vis-a-vis 14% with no education. And of course, one of our young people, Sri Devi, who's actually hadn't even turned 19, said, my education for 1 year has got washed out. Our situation was bad. My father expired. We didn't have anyone to take care of us. So I discontinued my education. But this is from our call sample. We need to go back now to our sample to really understand reasons why people left education. And we'll do that in the next round. In the head teacher survey, I'm not giving you too many findings because of paucity of time, but one of the biggest things that came out was private school principals talked about the fact that they were very worried about paying teachers because they were not being paid, they were not getting any fee, during this period. So collection of fee was becoming very difficult. And remember, these are low fee charging private schools, not the elite private schools. Even elite private schools had great difficulty during the pandemic, to be honest. But we are talking of the low fee charging private schools. But they were most worried about students from the poorest households, because we asked them, who do you think are the children most at risk of dropping out? And these head teachers talked about those from the poorest household being at the largest risk, followed by weak learners, girls, then boys, and then, of course, students with disabilities fare the last because, I guess there aren't that many, so they don't give them that much importance. But yeah, so, but it's very interesting to see how they prioritize, who they thought were going to be at most risk. Going from those from the poorest household, because I guess they understood that they didn't have the means to continue even joining virtual classes, many of them. So I'm going to move on to employment. And if you look at, these are the trends in work patterns, pre-pandemic, because like I mentioned to you, we did a tracking in December of 2019, January 2020. So that I'm calling pre-pandemic, just before the pandemic. And you can see, whereas almost 80% of the older cohort men were working, it dropped significantly during the lockdown and has come back. This is only older cohort now. Earlier I had presented to you a sample of both younger cohort, older cohort. This is only older cohort, 26 to 27-year-olds. You can see it's come back to the pre-pandemic levels now. But for the women, of course, it's completely flat. And that's something to worry about. And of course, when you look at occupational status in call 2, which we had collected data on what kind of jobs they were doing, you can clearly see that just 22% actually were in regular salaried employment, with 34% of men vis-a-vis 12% of female in regular salaried employment. Yeah. Not working, not surprisingly, 57% of the women, when we say not working, meaning not working for pay. Of course, they were working very hard. In terms of entrepreneurs, again, you have more men than women, self-employed, more men than women. Wage employment also, you can see 16.4% vis-a-vis 11%. This is the odds ratio. Pratap and I have just published in Indian Journal of Human Development this article. If any of you want, we'll give you the details. This is just an odds ratio showing you the likelihood of engagement in regular salaried employment, and you can see very clearly this is pre-COVID. This is from round 5. That means when the older cohort were 22 in 2019-20, and you can see females were almost you can see the figures, it's almost like 59% less likely to be in regular salaried employment vis-a-vis men. If they were married, again, you can see marital status, the last one. You can again see huge difference between those who are married and unmarried. So those who are unmarried those who are married were less likely to be in regular salaried employment. Those in urban locations were 1.9 times more likely to be in regular salaried employment. So these are all very significant. And if you look at call 2, again, this is, you can again see 65% less likely women to be in regular salaried employment vis-a-vis men. Caste is also significant. Urban, again, now in fact it's increased to 3.2 times more likely urban people to be in regular salaried employment than urban. So you can see the change over time, the odds ratio changing. And of course, when you look at time use, we'd collected some time use data over the phone. And during the lockdown, you can see when we asked them, whether you spend more time taking care of children, doing household chores, working in family business, and you can clearly see women. 61% women said they were doing more household chores during this pandemic than before, vis-a-vis 35% of the men. And 40% of the women said they were taking more time in taking care of children, vis-a-vis 26% of the men. So you can clearly see how traditional gender roles got, even more, entrenched during the pandemic. Be interesting to do an urban study also to see whether the same things had happened. I wonder if there is another study we can draw from. I just want to, tell you about, there's a lot of talk, about more girls getting married during the pandemic, yeah, but it was also anecdotal. We've just tried to do a cross-cohort comparison to see how many of our girls got married between the two cohorts, 7 years apart, got married before 18. So 28.1% of the older cohort in round 4, that means 2013. Yeah, this was the data, that 28% had got married before they turned 18. This is now 25% for the for the younger cohort. Not significantly different. And by age 19, we had 36.6% of the older cohort married. Now it's 30.3%. So I don't know where whether it is, how much we should be looking at the anecdotal, evidence that is emerging. Because there seems to be a slight dip, but it isn't even very significant dip, but there's no increase for sure. Finally, coming to findings related to well-being, which is really critical. So in each of the rounds, we used tools to actually capture both anxiety as well as depression. So GAD-7 and PHQ-5, and we looked at younger cohort, older cohort. This is about, we also use the Cantrell's ladder, which is a ladder where he asks young people to place themselves on the lowest rung to the highest rung. Yeah, so how do you compare yourself with anybody else your age, in terms of how you're doing, how you feel about yourself. And you can see the difference that the younger cohort at age 12, the black is the younger cohort and the red squares are the older cohort. At age 12, younger cohort were these are the mean well-being ladder scores, right? The younger cohort were far ahead of the older cohort, right? You can see older cohort were, the mean was about, I think, 3.6, 3.65. And here it was, something like 4.6. The younger cohort continued to have higher subjective well-being even at age 15, though you could see a huge jump in the older cohort between the ages of 12 and 15. But now we found that at 19, actually their subjective well-being is lower than the older cohort in 2019. That's a huge area of worry. Why should their subjective well-being of a cohort that was constantly on the uptake now suddenly crashed? And this obviously has to do with the pandemic, because at 19, the older cohort weren't going through the pandemic, right? But it's a poor sample in the same communities, and you can see the dip. Needs more investigation, of course. And in terms of anxiety and depression, you can see older cohort, you can see the lower bars. 15% in call 2 showed signs of anxiety. 12% showed depression. This decreased in call 3, in November 2020. Call 5, again, there was a slight increase from call 3, and it went up to 13 and 12%. So it's been a very negligible change over time. And this is, I think, an area which we need to focus on definitely, because this is a small sample we're talking about. So I think one of the big things I would say is we need to really enhance intersectoral convergence, especially because when we talk, our young people spoke about need for more occupation, opportunities. They're talking about not being able to get any credit. They needed food. There was food insecurity. Many of the young people, which I haven't really shared with you, especially the persons with disabilities, spoke about the fact they couldn't go out to even get medicines during this period. Never mind therapy. But even just medicines that my leg, a young person with cerebral palsy said, my leg has been hurting me so much and I haven't been able to see a doctor. So I think that we really need to bring all services together for families. Zero hunger, I think that needs to definitely be highest on our agenda. I mean, we can't have people having one meal a day. I mean, this is just not acceptable. We need to support female labor force participation because it gives them agency. I mean, we need to give those opportunities for young people. There are no care services available at the moment. How do you go into the labor force and there are no creches for young people to leave their babies? I mean, there is a real need right now to focus on that area. And of course, give them, opportunities to take their own decisions related to marital decision making, fertility decision making, I mean, the rest of it. And of course, we need to address the digital divide, also provide accessible digital divide, which is something that they have access to. So even within households, often the girls were never given the digital device. So, I mean, how do you also break that? We definitely need more mental health services available at the community level. And I think there is some thought, at Niti Aayog, etc. There's some conversations happening. I hope this sees the light of day. And there are more people who are equipped to make referrals, etc., including the school health system, because very young students also, many of them are facing anxiety and depression. We definitely need to increase spending on research, especially longitudinal research. I keep saying that because we need many more studies like that. And of course, India needs to, current R&D spending in terms of its GDP. Professor Sudhanshu, you probably correct me, but I think it's been stagnant at 0.6 to 0.7% in the last 2 decades. Unless we change that, I mean, we're not going to have any more evidence. And of course, we want to put quality measures into place to make sure the data we collect is also quality assured. I think we need all those mechanisms in place. Very important to find out what works. I think maximum amount of R&D now needs to go into what works. I think we need many more studies. And they don't only need to be RCTs, especially when it's, in the social sciences. I think we need to do more quasi-experimental designs, but with interventions, many arms, to look at it longitudinally, not cross-sectionally, but longitudinally, to see what works. I'm going to end now. Thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you so much, Dr. Singh. I would like to now open the floor for... okay, so we will just... Okay. So before we open the floor for question and answers, may I now request Professor Sudhanshu for his closing remarks?
Miss Sally, Dr. Renu, and all the persons who have gathered here. First of all, I would like to thank Young Lives and Dr. Renu for providing me this opportunity to come and reflect on some of the very, very important findings. First of all, I would like to congratulate you for a longitudinal study, because this is not a time series, this is not a cross-sectional. Your respondents are fixed, and then tracking those respondents for a 20-year in today's world where researchers do not have the patience, I think this is a great job. And I would also like to add that you are a very rare species of researchers. Now researchers uh, are in a hurry to publish. They want to take the credit as quickly as possible. And under those circumstances, doing a longitudinal, tracking it for 20 years, and what a fortuitous circumstances. Miss Sally was a part of decision making, and perhaps it is the God sent, I will say, circumstances that you are here. Uh, so it's a matter of indeed great, great satisfaction. Now, I would also like to congratulate you for another thing, why this study is important. Any study today which talks about inclusiveness is very important. In fact, there are discourses which are being created in India, the quality discourse, the efficiency discourse, merit discourse, but those discourses are also important. But creating a discourse on inclusive society is the pillar of a sound democracy. You cannot have a democracy where you cannot find people on equal footing. So I think for that reason, and in fact, a new trend that I see even amongst our MPhil and PhD scholars, most of them are taking up the work on disability, the work on inclusiveness, the gender, regional variations, if there are in educational opportunities, transgender. We did find a problem. We didn't have any specialist on transgender, and one student came that I want to work on this. So we did facilitate those students. So any research now which is being done for the cause of making a society inclusive is praiseworthy. For this second reason also, I think that this is a very, very wonderful work. Now, some of us do question ourselves, why inclusive society? And I would like to take you to one paragraph which Kant wrote. Kant said that, and Kant was a philosopher, late, 18th century philosopher, mid to 1807 perhaps he died. So he said that I used to think as a philosopher that I am a superior man, and those who know little are inferior person. And then Kant said that I had the opportunity to read David Hume's An Inquiry into Human Nature. And from that he gets an inspiration that no, the hierarchy, the distinctiveness cannot be made on the basis of income or wealth or knowledge. The basis of the numerator is the dignity of a man. And the dignity of everybody who is disabled, who is less educated or more educated, across all occupations, dignity is the only factor which is common. Every human being nature that requires respect for one's dignity. And this dignity is the philosophical base for equality, Why do we want equality in democracy? In democracy, we want equality because the dignity of each and everybody is important. The self-respect is very, very important, and that is the philosophical basis of equality in democracy. So democracy runs on two pillars. One, of course, is dignity and equality, and another important pillar is the freedom. So free will of a person, freedom is also the basic human nature that everybody wants. Now, it is for this reason that any study on inclusivity is very, very important, because equality is the pillar of democracy, and unless we get equality in our society, our quest for a good society will always remain there unless we really. And another important point that I would like to say why this study is important is that, see, one idea of equality and freedom, or the basis of constitution, contract, etc., is important on grounds of morality. And Kantian idea of democracy is based on morality. That as a moral human being, we need to provide respect, dignity, and freedom to each and every individual. I think that is a very important idea. But the second Habermasian understanding of democracy is that the constitutional basis of is not the morality. Of course, it is morality, but the constitutional basis need to be reinforced, strengthened by the discourse. I mean, a good democracy is one where things are decided on the basis of deliberations, discourse, public debate, and through public action. And this is what Amartya Sen also says finally, that the basis of a democracy, a good democracy is not one where decisions are imposed from above. A good democracy is one where deliberations become the basis of decision. And therefore, such a research, small research, if you understand the universe of research, this research is important because it creates a discourse, it creates a debate, and through such small efforts of many such scholars and researchers, we really create a voice. So how young lives are affected, those understanding, those voices will come from bottom to the up only when these discourses are generated. And of course, the process of change is a very slow process in a democracy or in any society, for example. The revolutionary way of change has not really found much acceptance. So in today's society, the acceptance to certain idea or to change has to be created through such small researches. And that is why the dissemination today is very, very important. Let us, she has also conveyed the message that let us do some more researches, let us disseminate this into other places. And I was called, perhaps because I do teach a course on education policy, but perhaps we do have a connect with the government in terms of policy support that our institutions provide. But I think that this process is slow. There is no linear connect between research and the policy. There is very hyperbolic relationship between research and policy. Policy is affected sometimes, of course, very violently by support to some ideology or something. But these kinds of researches, their connect with the policy is created over a period of time where we do wait for circumstances, where we do wait for certain certain persons whose acceptance is there, their voices get heard, and through all these processes, we try to come to the policy and we influence the policy. Now, you asked me critical remarks. I think there is very less in terms of critical because, as I understand, and there is more to appreciation, I will say. Of course, there are maybe issues of methodology, the telephonic survey, how did you really, how effective it was to get to the truth. That one may certainly, that is certainly a basis. But during COVID period, otherwise, how do you do a research? I mean, or how do you inform the people about what were the ground realities? So, of course, telephonic research could be could be could be the way to know the world of and the young lives. Uh, I just have, I mean, why Andhra Pradesh? I mean, that question everybody will keep asking. There may be reason. You have said the reason. The poverty removal measures were being taken, but how your finding will fit to a situation like Kerala, for example? How will this fit to a situation like Punjab, which is a completely different setting, Goa, which is a very high income state, and the responses of the government and the community might have been quite different. But then, I think one has to find out one representative. Now, how do we generalize? There is the whole issue of generalization when we come to a qualitative research. In quantitative research, the statistics gives an answer that if you have so much number and then perhaps it will be a normal distribution and there will be the possibility of generalization. In qualitative research, how do you generalize? This is a big question. I think the basis of generalization is that I am trying to understand one representative situation. There are situations which are extremes, situations where that representative may be to a lower side or to the higher side. But I want to understand the average, normal, represent. So, if I understand the average, then whatever be the variations to it, with that limitation, certainly I can say many things about our society, and to that extent it can be generalized. So I do question this whole sample, but I would like to also defend it because that understanding of that representative certainly tells me a lot. Certainly tells me, for example, why working from home and the labor class, low income class couldn't have that luxury. This is a very, very important finding. That there are certain sections where they could not have the luxury, they could not afford, and they have to go out. This is a very, very important finding. Now, the household income fell down, but this is caste neutral. Along all the sections of society, household income fell down. This is also very, very significant finding. It's not only certain deprived sections who suffered, but even those who are privileged sections who suffered. So I think that is also very, very important. Another important finding is that India is still a country where, unlike many other countries, where society, bond of society is very, very important. Under these circumstances, there were people to help. There were neighbors to help. There were people who were ready to give 5,000 as loan. They may be contractor. One example we have given that the contractor supported 5,000 they gave. So I think in a country like India, that bound that we have in terms of the community, in terms of the society, that is very, very important, and that also comes out from your study. I think this is very, very important. Mm, of course, enrollment came down during COVID, etc. I had conducted also one student satisfaction survey and one survey even during COVID, how higher education has been operative, and that has opened my eyes, let me tell you. This student satisfaction survey I conducted 2, 3 years ago. And before that, I used to think in terms of quality of education and so on and so forth. I visited roughly 40 colleges in all parts of India. And when I confronted the students, I found how some of the students, they are voiceless. Students told me that they come to the college and they take 3 hours to reach, 3 hours to go back, commuting by 3 modes of conveyance. I was in Chennai where students, I think I was told that all 100% of students are from BPL family. And how do they come to the college, and how part-time they support their life by doing some part-time job, etc. Now that means I could realize that, I mean, you cannot increase fees. I mean, people sometimes say, what is this 2,000 fees per annum? Of course, 2,000 fees may not matter, but, and I calculated, sir, Professor Tilak is here, I calculated from the National Sample Survey that 46% of the students are the first generation learners. Now, the transition to democracy that is taking place, there people are saying that there is a trade-off between massification and the quality. The more students will be there in higher education, the quality will fall down. But they do not realize that the strengthening of democracy is possible only when the opportunities are given to all sections of the society. That will make our democracy perhaps 50 years later a much vibrant democracy where everyone will be literate, most of them will have higher education opportunities. Therefore, what I am trying to say is that through all these surveys, I got the, in a way, enlightenment, you can say, that no, you cannot restrict the opportunity. You cannot increase fees. 2,000 rupees per annum means a lot for the poor people. And therefore, how can a state can run away from welfareism in a country like India? Our trajectory of democracy is completely different. Our trajectory of democracy, unlike West European countries, is completely different. Our experience of democracy is only 50, 60 years, 70 years. Now, under that we are making transition to a mass literacy or mass education and so on. So naturally, such situations will arise, and I think government cannot really afford to run away from welfare policy. And I'm afraid that we live in a neoliberal era where government is saying that let market provide the solutions. I think this is very dangerous. This is very dangerous. We cannot afford that. And if we are doing that, then the social crisis that we will face, economic crisis that we will face in future will be very, very huge, we will not be able to cope up with, and therefore my appeal to the community of researchers here is that let us keep our flag, let us keep our attention to these kinds of researches which will really make India a strong, and the pillars of democracy will be strengthened. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you so much, sir. Can we now open the floor for question and answers? So I'll just...
Congratulations to you, Dr. Renu Singh. As you said, longitudinal studies are very rare, and you could do it. I only wanted to know in the initial introduction there is a mention that it is a study covering 4 countries. Have you really continued with the other 3 countries? I just want to know how other countries fared in comparison to India.
I think, so all 4 countries continue. We do the waves in the similar fashion. All 4 countries are getting ready for the next round 7 survey. They've also conducted 5 rounds of the telephone survey during the pandemic. The only thing they didn't do was the disability study and the head teacher study, which only India did. But otherwise, the other survey rounds remain the same. We try not to make comparisons between the 4 countries, but I can tell you that there have been 4 country papers written, many papers. We have over 250 papers from India and about, I think, 1,400 now, Saltanat, is it? Internationally, 4 country papers. So do go onto the website and you will find Oxford website has all the 4 country papers, whereas the India website has the India papers itself. In terms of comparisons, the difficulty, in making, the idea is looking at the 4 countries and seeing trajectories of young people. So for example, I will give you an example, say from when we compare learning achievements at age 8, Vietnam and India were exactly at the same level at age 8. But when we compare learning achievements at age 19, Vietnam is far ahead. That's when it raises questions. I personally was very keen to go and study the Vietnam schooling education system to see how does it differ from ours. Because, they've also come out of a very different paradigm, and it is very state controlled. There are no private schools. There are very few private schools. I won't say there aren't, but there are very few private schools. In fact, for the Global Monitoring Report of 2021, I have written a paper where I've looked at teacher management and compared Vietnam and India. So do look at that paper. There are many issues that come up, So I think it's about one of the critical things we found was teachers in Vietnam take great pride in the work they do. Great pride. So if a child is not learning, it's a personal failure for them. Now this will only come out from a qualitative study, not from a quantitative survey. So that's why the mixed methods piece of the Young Lives study is really critical. Because from a quantitative survey, you'll only say, learning achievements, India is doing very badly. Why is India doing badly compared to Vietnam is the question. I'm just giving you one small example. And it was so clear when we did those qualitative interviews because teachers actually, some of them cried saying, I have these 2 children in my class who are not learning. And therefore, I give them tuitions after school. Tuitions without money, by the way. They can't take money. There's no question of taking money. Now look at us. We are diametrically opposite. Sorry to say. That is so, here it is, so that's, I think, when you look at worldviews, when you look at culture within educational systems, I think that's so tough to change. It'll change over decades, I think. I mean, we all want it to change, and we all still have hope, and one wants to remain optimistic, but it won't happen overnight. Somebody was saying the other day, if the minute all civil servants start putting their children into government schools will become better. We all laugh about it, but to be honest, when I went to school, that is exactly what happened. I went to a KV because my dad was in the army, and you had all kinds of people in Kendriya Vidyalayas also Sainik schools, because like I said, we were in the army. But today what happens, there is complete, nobody wants to send their kids to a government school. Yeah, because it's a different paradigm today, and then then more exclusion, less inclusion, because you grew up with many more diverse students in your classroom. Now today there isn't that kind of diversity. You don't even welcome that kind of diversity. So yeah, I think comparisons are a bit tough, but yes, I think what is more important is to learn from each other. I think lessons learned from each other is what we constantly look for. How can we learn? If there is a scheme that has worked in Peru, they had a Vavavasi scheme which actually created a paradigm shift in the ECD services. And we went to see that. We are very fortunate because we were able to go and study these, when you go to to meet your team members. And I saw one of the most important things where we have lots to learn in ICDS was there were mothers who were involved from the community in the Vavavasi scheme. So mothers were actually being paid and they were trained, and mothers were the ones who were overseeing all the work that was happening. There were creches within these Vavavasi schemes. So there was one room where little babies as young as 6 months, were allowed to come in, and they would be sleeping in their cots, and mothers would be looking after them. There would be another room where there would be classes held, and there would be a kitchen which was so spotless that you could eat off the floor. And there were little, the nutritionists would come in and would supervise the food being made by the mothers. So for the little 8-month-old, if they needed to be given 2 spoons, it was actually in a little glass, and nicely labeled to give what time to give, how many times to give. I mean, we are light years behind that. Lots to learn from each other.
Can I? Firstly, really want to say that your study was very enlightening, learned a lot, and also was very thrilled to see that you are included differently abled also in your study. And what I want to share is a request to you, because in the second round you would be looking at the enrollment trends in more depth. And what I want to share with you is, Dr. Singh, that I had visited Andhra Pradesh in first week of November, where I had visited schools, around 10 to 15 schools. And I felt very sad to see that the status of children who are differently abled has really gone down. It's actually regressed. I was in Samagra Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan for a very long time. And at that time, what we had done, the level we've achieved, we've actually gone down. Citing an example, I went into different schools, spoke to teachers, spoke to the HMs, and the HMs weren't aware how many children with disabilities did they have in their school. Teachers were given no training on IE. There were no ramps. When I asked why, they said there's no need to have a ramp. Our school's on ground floor. We don't have such children. Looked at the toilets. It had CWSN-friendly toilet. Went in. There was nothing that I could say, which we could say they were disabled friendly. So, and this was not the story of one school. It is across 10 to 15 schools that I visited. Spoke to the SMCs. None of them had parents of disabled children. Met children who were disabled when I spoke to them, they were given no transport, no escort. They were just coming. They were just there by default. So what I really want to say is that, yes, COVID can be a reason for the decline in enrollment of children who are disabled, but this could also be a reason because children are getting no support at all. Infrastructure-wise, we've gone down. Access-wise, I think we've really declined. Quality is, again, a big question mark. Teachers had no idea. I asked the headmaster, does a special education teacher come? Because I found many hearing impaired children. He says, he's asking, someone, "Aata hai teacher, aata hai." And then the other person is saying, "Yeah, yeah, the mandal level, there's someone resource person, that teacher comes maybe once a month." As there's any record, there's no record of whether, how many times the teacher comes, what exactly does he do with the child. There absolutely no record. So my request to you is that next time when you, in the next round, if you could just look at these issues so that it comes up, this can be another reason for decline in enrollment besides COVID. Thank you.
First of all, I congratulate you for conducting such a long, longitudinal study, because generally we observe that people conduct a study for 4 or 5 years or even 3 years, and they call it as longitudinal study. And sometimes even cross-sectional studies are termed as longitudinal studies, including the study that was conducted in relation to DPEP. I came across such study that where they have conducted cross-sectional study and they called it longitudinal study. So congratulations for conducting a real longitudinal study. Having said that, I'm more interested in the education pattern, continuing the education during the COVID period. And you have touched it some aspects, but I am more interested to know the nitty-gritties. If there is one mobile in the family, generally there is one or mobile, and there are 2 or more children, did you try to know who is given the preference? Just you mentioned somewhere, but might be in your study details might have come out, whether the boy or the girl of the family were given access to that mobile. The second thing is, how many hours the children have had to study during the COVID period through their schooling through internet or mobile services. Because you might, all of you might recall a very small girl of Kashmir who gave a message to Prime Minister why we have to study for 5 and 6 hours through mobile, because it is a health issue also, eyesight problems, whether they have increased or not during the long, focusing long on mobiles. So that is the second issue I am interested to know. And the other thing is connectivity in our country. Even here we don't have proper connectivity. We are sitting in Delhi, and here also we face the problem of connectivity. So continuing education for smaller children through online learning, it is good that they were able to do something during the COVID period, but can we continue, or is it an alternative? What are your suggestions and what has come out of your findings? Can you give something like that? Thank you.
Thank you again for such a wonderful presentation. As you know, some of you, I'm sure it's art lovers here, and if you want to experience research as an art, longitudinal study is the key for that. And I've been very fortunate to be part of such dissemination in the past as well from Dr. Renu. From an education perspective, again, when Professor Saroj was asking about some questions, the usage of mobile, we did a few studies again. There's no major comparison on that. But I would like to also ask few queries. It's not a kind of a question, but it's more curiosity from the two analyses that you have done. When you were talking about the quality of education was not happy, satisfaction about the quality. And there is also another data that you have presented on access, lack of access of the mobile. Now, is it because of lack of access they were unhappy about the quality, or is it the quality itself? Of course, the quality has been bad. Virtual education has not been the best. We have been not only having learning loss, there has been learning regression. So, having acknowledging the lack of quality, is there any variation that you found, from the respondents who said lack of access versus access and quality, and those who did not access and the perception of their quality? So, thank you once again. Sorry, this is Anthony from Bharati Foundation. And sometimes what happens when we know each other, especially Dr. Renu Singh, we become so casual and informal. In the interest of the time and the curiosity of question, I forgot to introduce myself. Sorry, Anthony from Bharati Foundation. I've been in the education sector for about 25 years.
Thank you, Professor Saroj and Anthony, for those questions. I don't have all the answers. We have to get funding to do another study too. So all the funders in the room, we are happy to do this because actually those are really critical questions you've asked. Um, this, like I said, we were doing half an hour calls, 5 calls. You can imagine how we had to restrict, and because we are a transdisciplinary team, each one of us has our own real passion areas, right? I want more education questions. I want more employment questions. So, I mean, this was time use was very important. Also, understanding the impact of COVID was very important. So, lots of things we haven't been able to do. That's why we are so grateful that we are getting funding to do a, face-to-face survey this year, coming year, because we know that we need to actually have a full-length survey now to understand all these very, very critical questions which are still remain unanswered. So yes, access was a problem. Girls more than boys, so definitely there was a gender bias happening within the homes. That I can tell you because we also collect data from siblings who are in the same household. So we are able to make, especially if the sibling is another gender, the younger sibling, we are able to then make some comparisons. So we've done that for a very small sample, but we were able to do that. We won't be able to answer why they said quality has gone down. Like I said, we need to do a proper study looking at quality and understanding and unpacking quality, definitely. Because could be lots of reasons and we don't know the reason why they're saying. We just wanted to get a perception over a telephone call. And like Professor Sudhanshu said, how effective our telephone calls also becomes an issue because there are certain questions you can ask and get answers for, and probing can only be done to a certain extent. The disability study, because it was a mixed method study and we use pure call, we could go into more depth into asking, and we interviewed the parent, we also interviewed the partner of the young person with disability, because many of them actually we found married. So please do read the report. There's a full report as well as a policy brief and a research brief. I haven't been able to share much of that, but please do read it.
Yeah, do you want me to stand up? Okay. Okay, my name is Meera and I work in a research organization called CORD. I just wanted to say that I thought the study was excellent. Thank you so much. Especially that you mentioned that the study is a pro-poor sample, and I think that there's such an emphasis in India to put a lot of attention on the well-to-do. So I think that any thing which puts attention on the poor, really has to be recommended. And I thought it's wonderful that you have so much continuity in the people collecting the data, continuity in your respondents, and so your data quality is good in the way that other researchers, would never have the opportunity. So I think that's really wonderful. And I also thought it was really exciting that you managed to speak to so many children, and in a sense you empowered them by allowing them to articulate what was happening to them, because so often it's all hidden and invisible. So I thought that was really exciting. In terms of your recommendations, I felt that could they not be widened? Because I thought that they seemed, more limited. Like what are the factors in a way which could have transformed these children's lives. So what we know is that these children are stuck in all kinds of different situations, but you actually have so much information about the ecosystem and even about the children themselves. So I thought that in terms of the recommendations, it would be useful to have a wider, what would transform these children's lives. And in terms of funding for research, having been a researcher all my life, I know that people who provide services feel very pained that a lot of money goes into research, and very little money goes into the provision of services. So I thought, as a policy for donors, if they could always allocate some percentage for research and some percentage for follow-up, because otherwise the money always stays with the researchers, with the research organizations, and the money actually doesn't reach the people whom we are researching. So I just thought that that would make a huge policy shift if it was always research and empowerment, and that they should not be separated. And I'm saying that as a researcher, that it's something that we have struggled to work at. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm taking, asking Miraji to come later. One is, of course, I agree fully with Meera with this. Okay, I'm Anuradha and I work with Meera and Cord, and we worked with education and nutrition and employment, different issues. There are two things which I wanted to ask about. One is a very methodological thing, that even when we do a single round of survey and come across a lot of people who are struggling in their life, how do you keep from not intervening, especially when you're doing a long term? So your team has to have a policy not to intervene. So that's a real challenge. The other was, I found very interesting that sense of well-being, how the older cohort suddenly has a very high sense of well-being and the younger cohort much lower. And I also thought that it's interesting that the vaccination, the younger cohort got less than the older cohort. And I was wondering whether the older cohort has now become head of the family, because they are older, so they have more agency, they can do what they want, whereas the younger cohort are more likely to be with their family, and their education and work opportunities have gone down. So I was just wondering that way.
Okay. First of all, Dr. Renu, for doing this longitudinally, congratulations, and you're doing it with as much enthusiasm and deep engagement as you were many, many years ago, having sort of been witness of your presentations of your various studies, being member of the advisory thing. Huh? And Sally, for your being there originally and being now and making sure that it continues later. Huh? And Professor Bhushan, what you said about inclusiveness and what democracy, this 2000% agree with you, and I really appreciate it, because at this particular time, it is needed more than ever. Huh? So after saying this about the longitudinal study, and I think you asked about Ethiopia and Peru and all, at one time you had said earlier that Vietnam in education doing much better, and why they were doing better. And you mentioned Ethiopia, because I'm part of also the People's Health Movement. My name is Dr. Meera Shiva. Sorry, I just remembered. Okay. Thank you. So I'm a health person, public health person. So at one point, you had mentioned earlier that one of the reasons in one of your earlier rounds, that one of the reasons for the children dropping out was someone in the family falling sick. So this whole issue of medical indebtedness being a reason for creation of poverty or making the poverty worse, even of the middle class and others. And now Twitter and Facebook are throwing people out. And if they are paying the EMIs, I don't know what's going to be happening to those young people. So they're going to be more depressed than the younger cohort being depressed, or feeling, less hope. So this whole question of hope and feeling hopeless, you know, that it is a public health issue, because you were also doing community assessment. So in that, what is this question of medical indebtedness? So wherever they have good public health services, you mentioned Kerala, that the people did not go into such deep debt. So wherever our health budget is 1.2% of GDP, it is, I think education is slightly better. But if the people, even the teachers are not trained, I'm not that much, but I know the sufferers who've been telling that with this phone business, connectivity problem is used. But the worst thing was that the teachers overnight told, now teach. Huh? So, but forget about children learning how to go about the gadgets where you can't see. Huh? But the teachers overnight being told teach. So so where will even the basics of health, whether you have 3 livers or 1 liver and 2 kidneys, even the basics of your health. So about the learning outcome, how much would undernutrition and malnutrition be affecting learning? And so at some point, someone should fund you to do that. Huh? And Miss Sally, I hope you're listening. And the other thing is that you talked about disability. I feel very strongly about that, because amongst, even in, they say gender, they say all women. No, if there are widows, how widows, our own society treats widows, and single women, how we treat our own disabled people. So coming to that point, you said artists, something art. There is this group of foot and mouth artists. Now the question is, they sell cards and things like that. But the most important things, why are they not having hands? So now there are pesticides and chemicals, and there are medicines, high dose estrogen progesterone combination, which, and earlier it was thalidomide, So the question is there preventable disability? Question. Someone should fund that. And in this spastic society, like children with cerebral palsy, when you give oxytocin and, earlier, too much. And the, you are supposed, when the contraction and dilatation of the uterus, that is the time when from the placenta, the baby gets the blood and oxygen. So many of these are cerebral palsy, many of these things are preventable. So I think attention to that, folic acid deficiency, severe folic. So in spastic society, many children with spina bifida, and then, they're disabled. So I would say that education, is it survive, thrive, one can do the downstream intervention, and one also needs to do the upstream. Now, who is going to do the comprehensive support of all this? I can only look at Ms. Ali, Huh? So the question of higher education, I do not know some of these children, because from higher education, for me, relevant education, meaningful education, and I did not know Gandhiji's Nai Talim. I was told about it by David Werner, who wrote Where There Is No Doctor. And because GK Pharmaceuticals opening in Bangladesh, anyway, long and short, he said, I want to visit Nai Talim. I had not heard of it. Shame on me. This was about 20 years ago. After that, what is it that children really need to learn? To be good human beings, do good citizens, and feel empowered about what they know. Children in villages can see the stars and tell the time, and they know which plant cattle can eat, and you know what. So anyway, from higher education, my little charana bit of thing is that a lot of education that is taking place is making some people zombies. because their wiring is only in a one way, and they are not comprehensive, and their selective blindness, they cannot see certain things, they cannot hear certain things. And so I would say that whoever is in whichever thing, needs to strengthen things that are needed. And congratulations to all three of you, for continuing to do this. And I hope in future also that there'll be more studies and dissemination in which we will be listening to you. So congratulations, Young Lives, sir.
Waiting for someone to ask a question, I just want to say that, yes, I think you're right, Meera. Policy recommendations from the study are very many. I mean, and we've been working on various facets, starting from child marriage. I think Sally mentioned, we made a deposition before the Parliamentary Standing Committee recently. So we take our findings, and we don't, so Young Lives India, which is now a registered entity. Earlier we were just an offshoot of the University of Oxford, but 2018 we become an Indian entity. So we're doing a lot more than just the longitudinal study. So we've done a lot of secondary research for the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, using NFHS 4 and 5 and the census. We do a lot more secondary research as well, because and the reason why we set ourselves up as an independent entity is because Oxford felt we were going beyond the mandate of just the longitudinal study. So I think our policy recommendations from the longitudinal studies, a lot of it stems from there, but we also use other data sets, and we make some specific recommendations on areas which are emerging from the study. And what we presented was just a very, a cursory thing which could come into one slide. But if you read all the fact sheets also, you will find separate recommendations in each one of them, whether it is a disability study, which we haven't presented today. But yes, that is a very important. Thank you for that. Yes, vaccination, you're right. It's the age. Also, remember, they were 18, 19, the younger ones, right? So also the age groups that when vaccination opened up was also different. So that also, along with the fact that if you're part of a larger family, the older people would probably go and get the vaccination first, and then the younger people, that would have also happened in these households. And yes, many of the older cohort are married. In fact, just to share with you, UNICEF India has funded us to now study the babies. Miradi, you'll be happy. We've just finished studying the babies of the older cohort and younger cohort. During the pandemic last year, in fact, in February of 2021, we went into the field and we studied the babies. So we will be disseminating the findings, I think, by next month. We have everything ready now. So it's very exciting to look at intergenerational transmission of poverty and to be able to see that. So.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Sameen. I work for Bharti Foundation. Amazing report. I can't wait to read the whole thing because I have now a lot more questions than, and now with discussion points, I think it's going to be an interesting read. Just one question for now. When you had shown the graph where the students who are in the younger cohort, the enrollment has gone down. Is it comparable to the older cohort when they were in that age group? Is there a difference, one? And secondly, because obviously I'm assuming not all of them would have done class 12th or whatever the highest education was. Was there a linkage between their attaining a certain educational level with the kind of job they were doing? Because the salaried people were they had a higher chance of getting, a salaried job. So was there any connect that we can see? Why I'm asking is, of course, pandemic made a difference, and hopefully we will not have another pandemic, but pandemic-like situations can happen. There can be shutdowns, there can be riots, there can be something of those sort that can actually hamper children. So that we just can think ahead and see what we should avoid. Thanks.
That's a really good question. Actually, we've just finished a paper which we still have to send to a journal. Amit and Pratap are also here. We're looking at the determinants of transitions into higher education, and we've also looked at in the journal paper that I mentioned earlier on regular salaried employment, which has already been published. We'll give you the link. Um, we looked at, so higher education, completion of higher education was directly correlated with regular salaried employment. But unfortunately, the women who, this was only so for the men, not for the women. And that's where that is what is worrying, because even if women completed higher education, many of them were not in regular salaried employment. And I think, so there is something we need to be looking at in terms of how women want, economic independence, etc., etc. I mean, what it means. Even in the disability study, if you look at, the study, we asked the question of, what women wanted to do, young, and lots of women. The good news was we found lots of our young women with disability married, and all of them to non-disabled people. So now that's really good news. So, when you're talking of inclusion, that was so interesting. I never thought that we would find something like that. This was really amazing. And I have to tell you what one of the young partners told me, because we interviewed the partners. And this is a visually impaired young woman. She had a baby as well. And we asked the partner that, so when you married her, and most of these were, by the way, arranged marriages. So, of course, our mind immediately went, maybe they were much poorer. You know how it is, we start, as researchers, we start thinking. And we asked him, and we said, so you married Lata, it's a pseudonym. So when she married you, were there any adjustments you had to make, like any other married couple? And he turned around and said, why should I make any adjustments? It's like marrying anybody else. She may not be able to see very well, but she can hear. And why are you even asking me this question? And the question came so, it was such a strong statement that, woman, you don't know what you're talking about. So sometimes, and it was so amazing. You get so much insight by just talking to these young people. You come away feeling so small that you don't even know. You know so little. So, so sometimes research also gives us an insight into things which we don't really know anything about. And it's not an academic pursuit. It's actually, when you listen to voices of young people, you learn so much. And we're so fortunate to be able to do that. And so humbling to be able to do that as well.
Any more questions? Yeah, sure. There's one more question.
So good afternoon. This is Kuldeep here. I do work with the Aga Khan Foundation, and I am coming from Bihar today to attend this wonderful dissemination event. So I thank you and for inviting us here. So I do work with the School 2030 program, which is more or less same program and being implemented in 10 countries across the globe. In India, we work in Bihar within the 5 districts. So I was curious, out of my curiosity, I mean, this is really very hard, very complex thing to conduct such a huge work. So I was wondering what kind of challenges and problems you encountered, methodological challenges you encountered, conducting and, going behind the same person throughout the years. So this is one query, and you need not to respond it today only, but definitely I'll be in touch with you. Yeah. Second thing, which I really would like to know, we talk about vulnerabilities a lot, but what about the resilience, particularly educational resilience? What kind of pattern is emerging out of the data that youth is coming up the educational resilience? And how do we learn about it? How can we take some lessons out of it? and translate into the policy, particularly related to the educational policies. And second and last thing is that socio-cultural phenomena throughout the last 20 years has changed a lot. And the life, the vulnerabilities and resilience go hand in hand with the immediate contemporary socio-political phenomena. So what kind of changes and shifts you look out of the data, that there are some certain relationships and there are some certain shifts within the resilience and vulnerabilities vis-a-vis to the political and socio-cultural scenario in India. Thank you.
Lots of very, very, very interesting questions, and of course, we need to have a long chat about them. But just to say that, the longitudinal study, I mean, there are lots of technical notes that we also have up on our website, which tell you, some of the things, the lessons that we've learned. In fact, ESRC has funded Oxford and us to look at also developing a lot of material to support other longitudinal studies. So all our lessons that we have learned in the various countries, we are kind of trying to put together, because this is also important to share with other researchers who might want to do this. I think, like I mentioned during my presentation, the fact that we have the team of supervisors and researchers, core researchers, have remained with us all these 20 years is key to doing good research. Otherwise it is, even now, in every round we have about, I would say in the last round we had about 45 or 50%. So even the field enumerators are the same as the last round. So even in round 5, when we did the face-to-face survey, we had about 30% of the surveyors who were the same as round 1. Because I asked the question, how many of you in the room were in round 1 to collect the data? So we had about 30%. And we do a month of training every time. 1 month residential training is done, despite everything else. So, we have 2 weeks of the supervisors training. The supervisors have been with us throughout these 21 years. They're full-time employees. CES is an ICSSR body. So our partner is also a research institute. We see it as a way of actually also supporting another institute and collaborating with them. In terms of your other question, how are they resilient? There is a very interesting paper you might want to read, which is called Push Out, Pull Out Factors, which we did a couple of years ago. There's also a book chapter. You can have a look at that. So when you're looking at resilience and vulnerabilities, you can look at all those, both in school and out of school factors. Often, educational researchers only look at in-school factors. But our research that way has the, I would say we are very fortunate, but we can look at all factors, familial, community-based, as well as school-based. And we've done 2 school surveys specifically in the primary level and at secondary level. And now hopefully we'll do a higher education survey. Professor Sudhanshu, I will come and ask you for ideas. If we get resources, we would like to do a higher education survey. The only problem is higher education, they're going to be spread out across so many institutes. It's going to be a big challenge to be able to, schools are still easier to do because they won't have gone so far away from their homes. And even if they were in boarding schools, we went to the boarding schools and we sampled them, etc. But yes, I think there are lots of papers that you can draw upon to build on that.
Thank you everyone for your questions, and I'm sure your questions have been, you've got all the answers that you were looking forward to. May I now request Dr. Singh to finally come up and for her vote of thanks.
So thank you all for coming, and it's and for listening. And I know we have lots more questions and lots more to talk about and deliberate upon. Our idea is always that the research that we generate feeds into programs, because that's really important. So partners who are doing programming are very important to us. And equally important are policymakers, because ultimately we must create a voice and be able to create those changes together. But both programs and policies are what we constantly look for feeding into. So lots of papers, pure quantitative papers, using regressions, etc., which will tell you some of the key determinants that are important for quality, for transitions into secondary education, transitions into higher education. So you'll get lots more papers. Please do visit our website and do use our data, which is in the public domain. And now please join us for lunch outside. Thank you. Thank you very much.